I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're uncovering the untold story of the USS Kitty Hawk race riot with Marv Truhe, author of Against All Tides, the untold story of the USS Kitty Hawk race riot. This powerful book reveals the simmering racial tensions and injustices faced by Black sailors aboard the ship during a violent confrontation in 1972. Join us as Marv, a former Navy JAG defense lawyer, sheds light on this dark chapter in naval history and his fight for justice. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Marv, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Well, thank you, Logan, and thank you for inviting me to be on your program. I've been looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I think this is an episode in U.S. military history that relatively few people know much about. Tell us a little bit about your knowledge or how you gained knowledge of the USS Kitty Hawk race riot back in October 12th, 1972.
Well, as you mentioned, Logan, I was in the U.S. Navy. I was serving as a Naval JAG officer, Judge Advocate General. At the time, I was serving at the Law Center in San Diego, California. The incident we're talking about took place on the USS Kitty Hawk, an attack carrier, while it was conducting bombing runs in the South China Sea, just off the coast of North Vietnam. And the incident, as you mentioned, on October 12th, 1972, took place that evening after the daily bombing runs had ended and started with altercations between the Marines and some black sailors and eventually black and white sailors. And it led to some very violent confrontations. And it lasted a total of 6 hours. That might be a little hard to understand how that sort of uncontrolled mayhem could have taken place. But the readers will have to, and your audience will have to recognize that the carrier is huge, floating city, about a quarter mile long, over 4,500 officers and enlisted men at the time.
That could have gone really far south. I mean, that could have gone really, really bad. It's bad enough as it was. We had 50 or so sailors injured in the mayhem. But like you said, with 4,500 sailors on that ship, it could have been deadly. It could have been like a prison riot.
Right, exactly. We were fortunate, I think, in the fact that most of the sailors eventually armed themselves with makeshift weapons. That included pipes, dogging wrenches, broken off broom handles. There were actually a couple of reports of knives being used. Fortunately, no guns, and fortunately, no fatalities. But as you mentioned, we had 51 seriously injured sailors, black and white, who ended up being treated, and 3 of them actually had to be flown off the carrier all the way back to the Subic Bay Naval Base for further surgical intervention. So it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What was your role during this time as a JAG officer?
Well, I was serving at the Law Center, as I mentioned, in San Diego. And as other JAG officers, we were rotated between prosecuting cases and defending cases about every 6 months. And I just happened to be on what we call the defense wing at the time. And when the sailors were charged and they were brought back, all black sailors, to San Diego, I was assigned to represent 6 of them. And so the book comes out of my representation of them, but it also, and this is important for your viewers to know, that I saved 5 banker boxes of original source documents from the trials and from the investigation reports and all of the medical reports. I saved them this past 50 years. So my book does not rely upon my memory. It relies upon thousands of pages of original sources. And it was very important to me the book be not only complete, also fair, balanced. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't writing a one-sided book. And that's the reason I have over 1,000 citations, those various records, including a congressional hearing that was held for 2 weeks prior to the trials.
Now, when it came to putting those responsible on trial, were the defendants predominantly Black? Were they prosecuted at a higher rate than their white counterparts?
It's even worse than that. 25 Black sailors were charged within a matter of 2 weeks after the incident, but not a single white sailor. Wow. Repeat that, 25 Black sailors, not a single white sailor. We're talking about interracial confrontations between Black and white sailors and Black sailors and white Marines. The reason for that, Logan, is that the captain of the ship, Captain Townsend, made a decision the very next day that the investigative team would not take any statements from Black sailors. Talking about Black sailors who were seriously injured, just as some of the white sailors were, but he directed them not to take any statements. And so I have, including my clients, I have one client, Cleveland Mallory, who was leaving his work area, working in the ship's store, and 3 white sailors jumped him with a pipe, broke several of his ribs. And the next day, he tried to report that injury because he thought he could identify the assailants, and they refused to take his statement. And that was true throughout. And so after 2 weeks of taking statements only from white sailors, the captain charged 25 Black sailors and not a single white sailor. And those were the ones that were then flown back to San Diego a couple of weeks ahead of the ship coming back. And that's when our representation took place.
Amazing, amazing. Did they get a fair shake? And I guess it was a court martial, right?
Yes, special courts martial. And they were individual trials, not a group trial. Those trials lasted for several months, from January of 1973 through April. And there were several instances of blatant miscarriages of justice. My first client to go to trial, Cleveland Mallory, the young sailor who had his ribs broken, he was convicted on perjured testimony. I'm not talking about an alibi. I'm not talking about self-defense. Clear perjured testimony. And at the time, the military judge, a senior naval officer, we did not have a jury for that trial, not only convicted him, but gave him a bad conduct discharge. And we were so incensed about the miscarriage because it was so clear that there was perjury going on. Well, to give you a quick synopsis, he claimed that he knew my client and was a friend of my client's because 3 months earlier in Hong Kong in port, that's where he met him at a bar and befriended him. Well, this is a Perry Mason moment. My client was never in Hong Kong. Put on the division officer testified that my client missed the sailing of the boat from Subic Bay and never made it to Hong Kong. That's how blatant the perjury was, and yet he was convicted. But in answer to your question, he had some very positive outcomes, largely because NAACP hired half a dozen civilian lawyers in California to assist us in the trial, sit with us at these special court-martial hearings. And after this travesty of justice, we convinced them to hire a private undercover agent, try to expose the perjury. And we had a wonderful agent. He was a third-year law student in San Diego, former Marine officer, former FBI agent who had worked undercover. And he went undercover and befriended the perjurer, the white sailor, and got him to admit on tapes, secretly taped, that he had lied, not only in this trial, but in other cases, to convict Black sailors. Of course, he had never met my client, and that was totally made up. And so the NAACP at that point had a national press conference in New York City, and they released these transcripts of the perjury tapes to the press. And I have to say, I'm very pleased that cases started turning in our favor. They reversed that conviction. And most of the other sailors, other white sailors who were concerned that they too might have been taped, they started withdrawing their testimony. And so the ultimate outcome was very positive. But for those few months, it was terrible for clients.
Amazing, amazing. As you tell the story, it is so dramatic. It is so profound. Um, to me, it has Hollywood written all over it. I mean, you know, Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson did quite a good job on their war story.
Yeah.
You Can't Handle the Truth and all that, whatever the name of that movie was, it escapes me right now. But have you envisioned this as a film?
Well, actually, yes. The movie, incidentally, was A Few Good Men.
A Few
Uh,
Good Men. That's it.
yeah. And of course, that also involved a Navy defense lawyer, JAG
Exactly.
officer, Cruz. We have been getting some inquiries with regard to that. Interesting note, perhaps, for your audience, is that I was very lucky to get a literary agent, first-time author, and I thought it might be self-publishing. But within 3 days of sending out query letters, I got a very experienced literary agent who's had several of his authors' books made into movies. He specializes in military books. And so we've had some inquiries, but nothing has come to fruition yet.
Yeah.
But he felt so strongly about it that he insisted that instead of the publisher, which is the publisher in Chicago, having the entertainment rights, which apparently is very typical for first-time authors, he negotiated such that I retain the entertainment right. And I have been getting inquiries about it. As a matter of fact, I was on the phone just this morning with somebody in the Boston area about the possibility of representing me. But yes, that's it's a long shot, but
right. Well,
it
the
would be
work is out there now. The story is amazing, you know, with the perjured testimony and the undercover tapes and so forth and so on. And the tension itself that boiled over on the ship. I mean, obviously, there were events leading up to that that would be part of the story as well, for there to be so much discord. So I think it's a fascinating story. It's a wonderful book. It would make a wonderful movie or TV series, that's for sure. The name of the book is called Against All Tides, The Untold Story of the USS Kitty Hawk Race Riot. It took place on October 12th, 1972 in the South China Sea, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's correct. After the day's bombing runs had ceased, and it started, there were some just brutal altercations between black and white sailors. And they had started because in the weeks leading up to this, there had been several single incidents of a black sailor assaulting a white sailor or vice versa. And in each case, the captain took them to what the Navy calls captain's masts. These are non-judicial hearings on board. And every case, Logan, when a white sailor was the assailant, he dismissed the charges without even bringing any punishment, in only one exception to that, $25 fine. Yet when black sailors had assaulted white sailor, again, one-on-one, he gave him maximum punishment. 30 days in the brig, busted in rank. And in one case, a dishonorable discharge resulted. And of course, this was simmering aboard the ship. The ship had about 300 black sailors, about 7% of the complement. They started holding meetings, and as a matter of fact, they insisted on meeting with the captain to explain these one-sided discriminatory captain's masts. And he never could explain it. Well, the particular evening, there were some verbal exchanges between black and white sailors. At that point, the captain and the XO, and the XO was a black man, is a black man, since passed, Commander Cloud, and he was instrumental in breaking up many of these altercations. But they met with the black sailors, and everything was simmered down, and everybody was heading back to their workstations or back to their racks. And at that point, a Marine captain took it upon himself to order the Marines to break up any groups of 3 or more black sailors. Mind you, not any black sailors that were causing problems, but just either in the mess hall, walking back to their workstation, and they started aggressively breaking them up, but not breaking up any groups of white
Amazing.
And the word spread rapidly. Matter of fact, the captain, the commander of the ship, XO, he actually testified before the congressional hearing that the Marines breaking up groups of peaceable black sailors started the entire.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. Blatant discrimination, no doubt. Injustice is infuriating, and I'm sure it's the reason why tensions boiled over on that day. Once again, the name of the book is Against All Tides: The Untold Story of the USS Kitty Hawk Race Riot. Marv, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
And thank you for the invitation. It was an honor to be here.
Honor is all mine, sir. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.